Hi everyone. This is my analysis and critique of Andrew Yang's performance in this past Thursday's Democratic debate, night 2. I think I can speak for everyone. My disappointment with the structure of the night and how it basically screwed over Andrew. Unfortunately, and I think Kyle Kulinski had this right in his analysis of the debate, that Yang is one of the bigger losers in this debate. Not in the sense that he didn't benefit from just simply being there, but it really killed his momentum coming into the night. He was flying high off the Colbert show, the Bill Maher appearance, and he was getting retweets like mad. And he really needed to show up here and perform. And, I got so many messages about how, don't worry, Yang's a master debater. He was a finalist in, tournaments and so on and so forth. But what people don't get is that debates is not a public speaking event, You're competing in a extremely narrow purview where you're trying to convince one judge of some policy, and you want to get out your facts as soon as you can, as fast as you can, while still being coherent. Now, in that sense, this is no debate at all. This is talking and speaking directly to the hearts and minds of the American people, most of which are not debate coaches or debate judges. You're not trying to convince a debate judge. You're trying to convince the American people. And in that sense, Andrew lacks certain qualities, and we're going to explore it here today. And I want to provide some constructive criticism on how he can become more persuasive and more succinct and more persuasive while not losing, the facts and logic that drew us to his campaign to begin with. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start with the first question of the night for him, which was, how are you going to pay for your UBI? And, I'm going to play the clip for you, and we're going to go what he did well and what he didn't do well, and, we'll go from there. I think we're also going to tackle healthcare, foreign policy, and I think that'll be it. There was a lot of other topics, obviously, presented, but we'll start with that. All right. So let's go ahead and start with that.
Mr. Yang, your signature policy is to
buy our first home. This is the generation that's going to be able to solve student loan debt. This generation is ready to lead.
Mr. Yang, your signature policy is to give every adult in the United States $1,000 a month, no questions asked.
This was a mistake right here.
I think that's like $3.2 trillion a year. How would you do that? Sorry? How would you do
that? Was a huge blunder, and probably not mostly due to his fault. It probably was the stage. We heard throughout the night that people were having trouble hearing the moderators. But as an introduction to the American people, that was not good.
Do that?
Oh, so it's difficult to do if you have companies like Amazon, trillion-dollar tech companies, paying literally zero in taxes while they're closing 30% of our stores. Now, we need to put the American people in position to benefit from all these innovations in other parts of the economy. And if we had a value-added tax at even half the European level, it would generate over $800 billion in new revenue, which combined with the money in our hands, it would be the trickle-up economy from our people, families, and communities up. We would spend the money and it would circulate through our regional economies and neighborhoods, creating millions of jobs, making our families stronger and healthier. We'd save money on things like incarceration, homelessness services, emergency room health care, and just the value gains from having a stronger, healthier, mentally healthier population would increase GDP by $700 billion. This is the move that we have to make, particularly as technology is now automating away millions of American jobs. It's why Donald Trump is our president today, that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And we're about to do the same thing to millions of retail jobs, call center jobs, fast food jobs, truck driving jobs, and on and on through the economy.
So, as you can see, he was getting through a tremendous amount of facts. We've heard it all before. I mean, if you're Yang Gang at all, you've heard this pitch before, and it's nothing different. Now, I really have to question the wisdom of his debate prep. I don't know who his campaign manager or advisors are, by trying to squeeze in this vast amount of information in what was, I assume was, say, 24, like essentially a minute. Like, he started here at 2:45 and it went down, and he got it like about a minute, and like that was totally the wrong approach in my opinion. Even as Yang Gang members, I am sure we've heard the Joe Rogan podcast, the Breakfast Club interview, all these other interviews where Andrew's had essentially an hour or more to pitch this idea to us, and it took us a long time to get to where he was at. But he basically threw 10 darts at a wall and hoping something would stick, and I think it really just fell flat, to be honest. In fact, you don't have to look very much further in just this own debate where Kamala Harris essentially pitched a basic income. But she did it in a very engaging way where it resonates with the American people and why we have to make this move. Now I am no Harris fan, but you have to mix building the logical part and mixing in with the emotions, the pathos and the logos, where good persuasive speech is, So, for example, something I would have said was, the answer is simple. How would we pay for UBI? The answer is simple. We follow the example of every industrialized nation in the world and implement a VAT tax at half the European level, which will tax, trillion-dollar companies like Amazon and Google that are paying zero in taxes now. This will give the American people a slice of every Amazon purchase, every Google search, every Facebook ad. This, coupled with the overlapping programs and savings, will easily pay for my freedom dividend of $1,000 for every American adult. No questions asked. And then, right there, see, you don't have to go into all the other aspects of why you're implementing it. You just answer the question directly. How are we going to pay for it? Bam, bam, bam. And that, from there, now all of what Andrew said was, all true, and you can't fault him for that. But now it's time to build rapport. If you look at the Harris answer, she did exactly this. And I would have continued to say, by building rapport, it's like, but the real question is, why didn't we ask the same question about how we were going to pay for trillions of dollars we spent on foreign regime change wars, on the Wall Street bailouts? Did they ask how we were going to pay for the trillions of dollars of debt thanks to Trump's tax cuts? Those are relevant things that people immediately understand. And then you go on to say, no, the real question is why the establishment is more concerned about lining the pockets of corporations rather than benefiting the American people. And tonight, I'm going to lay out why the freedom dividend will be the single greatest policy that will directly change the lives of every single American in our economy. We will build a trickle-up economy from people, families, and communities up. Which, in that way, you would have said something very, very similar to what Yang said, but without having to dive into the details, which would honestly just go over the head of most Americans, right? So naturally, you give a short answer, you're going to get a follow-up answer, which is great. That's what you want, So obviously, and what I think Hester Lolt is going to ask next is how won't it just be passed to the consumer, right? So let's see how Andrew answers it.
Sir, if I get you understand a little bit better, so you're saying $1,000 a month for everyone over 18, but a value-added tax, so you can spend that $1,000 on value-added tax?
Well, the value-added tax would end up, you'd still be increasing the buying power of the bottom 94% of Americans. You have to spend a lot of money for a mild value-added tax to eat up $12,000 a year per individual. So for the average family with 2 or 3 adults, it'd be $24,000 to $36,000 a year.
Okay, Congressman Swalwell, I want to talk a little bit about what Mr. Yang is talking about, and you just actually mentioned a minute.
Okay. So, again, there was a lot of numbers thrown out, and it's gonna fly by most Americans' heads. 24,000, 36,000. Yeah, that sounds like a lot, and he's talking about all these other aspects of it, which are all true and which all make sense once you have a chance to examine it. But use this time to speak more slowly and draw out your speaking time, because fundamentally you want more eyeballs on you. There's no reason to actually stick to the rules of the debate, since no one actually sticks to the rules of the debate, right? In fact, you should probably ask, the moderator. This sounds suspiciously like other right-wing critics of the minimum wage, that simply the cost is going to be passed down to the consumers. And while it is true that some of the cost might be passed down to the consumer, the totality of the cost would be eaten up by the freedom dividend. Now, if I were to ask any average American, would you pay $100 to get $900 or $1,000? Everyone would say yes, and that's basically it. That's basically it. You just give an example, and then just shut that shit down immediately, right? And like you said, the fact is 95% of Americans would be better off. Everyday Americans just making a living. We can get and he can use his catchphrase here, we can get the economic boot off people's throats and let them concentrate on what really matters. He starts talking too quickly about all these other facts and numbers that most people, won't be able to recognize immediately or digest, right? Come up with a specific anecdote and just illustrate that the rising cost is, not a non-issue. So let's go. I would like to have talked about his healthcare. Unfortunately, Andrew did not get asked this question, so he never had a chance to answer this, right? So, but what I would have liked to hear him say was something like, look, we need Medicare for all. End of story. Don't go into this long-winded, morality preaching that all the other candidates did. Speak from a logical point of view while it's still empathizable, right? Empathizable. I'm not sure if that's a word, but say, look, we need Medicare for all. End of story. I'm an entrepreneur and I've met payroll thousands of times, and let me tell you, there's nothing that disincentivizes small businesses more from hiring than needing to pay for healthcare. Everyone else talks about the theory of this or the theory of that, and I've been there. I've been on the boots on the ground, and nothing would be better for businesses, both big and small, to not have to deal with healthcare. That immediately would resonate with most people. Especially business owners. You're like, yeah, I don't need to deal with healthcare, and everyone would be taken care of, right? It illustrates his position on the policy, which is Medicare for all, and he could also, in addition, start painting the picture of why this is necessary, along with his freedom dividend, right? So you would continue on and say, look, this comes at a time where temporary gig and contract work is being generated at record levels. Less and less full-time work is being created, in large part due to automation, AI, and robotics. In fact, some estimates have the gig economy to overtake 40+% by 2020. That means a little less than half of every worker is going to not be working full-time in the traditional sense. So we are dealing with an unprecedented amount of change in the very structure of the economy, whereby companies no longer need to hire people full-time. This will have disastrous effects on the vast majority of working Americans. And this is a great way of pivoting. And this is what all experienced politicians have done. They take a question and pivot into a talking point which benefits his vision. Now you can go over a tiny bit of time and just, make sure you're focused. But this is a great opportunity of how you can link why a UBI, the freedom dividend, and healthcare would also benefit the vast majority of Americans. And that was a huge missed opportunity for him. Unfortunately, as many of you have heard, I think he was having some technical difficulties, let's just say, cough MSNBC. But let's see if we can continue on.
Americans are worried that things like self-driving cars, robots, drones, artificial intelligence.
this is a great opportunity, and unfortunately they gave it to this jackass Swalwell.
Will cost them their jobs. What would you do to help people get the skills they need to adapt to this new world?
We must always be a country where technology creates more jobs than it displaces.
So this is a non-answer. He's basically stating a tautology. He's saying, look, we need to create more jobs, but he doesn't answer really how, And
I've seen the anxiety across
now
America
he goes into a anecdote.
Manufacturing floors go from 1,000 to 100 to 1. So we have to modernize our schools, value the teachers who prepare our kids, wipe the student debt from any teacher that goes into a community that needs it, invest in America's communities, especially where the best exports are people who move away to get skills. But Jose,
see, here's the pivot.
I was 6 years old when a presidential
and this was a good pivot, I think.
Candidate came to the California Democratic Convention and said, it's time to pass the torch to a new generation of Americans. That candidate was then Senator Joe Biden. Joe Biden was right when he said it was time to pass the torch to a new generation of Americans 32 years ago. He's still right today. If we're going to solve the issues of automation, pass the torch.
Wow, so basically you just called him out saying, the future is now, old man, pass the torch. I mean, you might as well just go over there and sucker punch him in the face. But, I didn't. I think this was, clearly a manufactured, position where all the, candidates are trying to stand out by taking a swing at the king, the front runner Joe Biden right now. But it kind of made Swalwell, a little petulant. So we'll see here.
We're going to solve the issues of climate chaos, pass the torch
for our primary.
Before we move on from
issue, if I may say, is not generational.
Please.
The issue is not generational. The issue is who has the guts to take on.
Senator Harris, please, we will let you all speak. Senator Harris.
We can't afford to wait for evolution on these issues.
Hey guys, you know what? America does not want to witness a food fight. They want to know how we're going to put food on their table.
That was a good line. And this is really speaking to, this is really trying to reach the audience, right? Reach the policy. And even Joe Biden here is clapping at, Kamala Harris here. I had read a Reddit post the other, just yesterday, about how Andrew can, really break this wall, break the wall of the mainstream media. He says, I think I have it here somewhere, but I think he was hoping that Andrew would say something like this. He says, I'm not a politician, so I think I can speak for the majority of Americans when I say it's not lost on anyone that this format isn't optimized for informing the public of who we are as candidates and what we bring to the table. The American people are smart. This format is forcing voters to determine the fate of the nation based on the most replayable soundbite. And this would, attack Kamala here. Why else would a bunch of professional grown men and women stand here and behave in a way none of us would do in any other context? Talking over each other, false bravado, all for a breakout moment. It's all a bit disingenuous, and this is why our democracy is becoming increasingly dysfunctional. With all due respect, I'm here to solve the problems of the American people, not increase ratings. So if you have a good faith interest in my campaign and solutions, you can find over 100 policy proposals fleshed out in detail. That said, he probably would have done this if he had been asked a question. But I think another great quote someone else had said was, when mainstream media turned politics into reality TV, or what was it? The mainstream media shouldn't have been surprised that Donald Trump was elected, or they elected a reality TV star when they turned politics into reality TV, which is completely true. I mean, this format is horrendous for actually talking about, the actual ideas and substance of their policies.
So, on that point, part of the issue that is at play in America today, and we've all been traveling around the country, I certainly have, I'm meeting people who are working 2 and 3 jobs. This president walks around well, that's fine if you own stocks.
Yeah,
So
this
many
here she's
families in
talking
America
about,
do not. You ask them, how are
1%
you
and all
measuring? The
that.
greatly clear. In our America, no one should have to work more than one job to have a roof over their head and food on the table.
This would have been a great opportunity for Andrew to jump in with his freedom dividend, you know. Another great point is, someone had mentioned, was that the average seat at the debates was $2,000. I would have loved if Andrew addressed that and said something, you know, when it was appropriate, said something like, look, we're talking to an audience that spent over $2,000 per seat on a weekday. You know, this is not the average American that we are, you know, reaching at. We are becoming the elites that the Republicans are hammering us on. You know, I want to speak directly to the American people that Kamala Harris is talking about how people should not be having to work one job, more than one job. But the fact is, you know, she does not have any concrete solutions to how. And now it might not matter to most of the members of this audience, but $1,000 extra a month would be a game changer for every single American family. It would essentially relieve them many of them, the burden of having to work more than one job, which is a huge plus. You know, these are the timings that he needs to learn and be able to inject himself in. So let's continue. Let's see if we can find a foreign policy, which I thought he should have said something about.
They, in fact, contribute to the well-being of the country, but they also, for example, reducing the deal they're doing, paying doctors to prescribe. We could be doing this by making sure everyone who is on Medicare, that the government should be able to. Time's up.
Let's see.
Thank you very much. Senator Harris, last month, more than 130,000 migrants were apprehended at the southern border. Many of them are being detained, including small children, in private detention centers in Florida and throughout our country. Most of the candidates on this stage say the conditions at these...
California, I led the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to the United States Department of Justice in a state of 40 million people.
Who said he spent 6 years building up patrol.
Worried about China.
To this country to begin with, we need to make a change. Holding borders can see immigrants for you because
of manipulating their currency to keep the cost of goods artificially low. I'll ask this to Senator Bennett to start off with. How would you stand up to China?
I think that, first of all, the biggest threat to our national security right now is Russia, not China. And second, on China, we've got competition because of what they've done with our elections. In China, I think the president's been right to push back on China, but has done it in completely the wrong way. We should mobilize the entire rest of the world who all have a shared interest in pushing back on China's mercantilist trade policies, and I think we can do that. I'd like to answer the other question.
But here's he pivoting to another thing, but he really had a non-answer. It was like basically push China to get better trade agreements. I mean, it's
not for much not.
Of course, they have to
ask on the issue of
China. I mean, I can't imagine why.
China, you've expressed a lot of concerns about technology and taking jobs. Are you worried about China? And if so, how would you stand up against it?
Okay, before I play his response, I think as every Yang Gang member knows how he generally responds to this sentiment about immigration worries or foreign adversaries here. Specifically, he was kind of thrown this softball with about automation, so he had an easy pivot here. I'm surprised he didn't do it.
Well, I just want to agree that I think Russia is our greatest geopolitical threat because they've been hacking our democracy successfully, and they've been laughing their asses off about it for the last couple of years. So we should focus on that before we start worrying about other threats. Now, China...
I feel like that wasn't rehearsed enough. It didn't seem strong enough. I mean, if you're going to go the Russia route, you're going to have to at least hammer home some specific things. Otherwise, I think it kind of fell flat. You can see here the audience members didn't really know if they were going to clap, but it is what it is. I think he needs to either polish that up or find a new, bigger threat. I think it would have been a much better thing to say, look, the biggest threat to us right now is automation. I think he should have probably just clarified on that.
They do pirate our intellectual property. It's a massive problem. But
sorry, I'm going to let you hear
the tariffs and the trade war are just punishing businesses and producers and workers on both sides. I met with a farmer in Iowa who said he spent 6 years building up a buying relationship in China that's now disappeared and gone forever. And the beneficiaries have not been American workers or people in China. It's been Southeast Asia and other producers that have then stepped into the void. So we need to crack down on Chinese malfeasance in the trade relationship, but the tariffs and the trade war are the wrong way to go.
All true. Like, what can you say? Like, all those things are probably true. How does that resonate with voters? I mean, it probably doesn't very much. His whole campaign has been on a technocratic, bent where the biggest threat to our way of life is automation. And he could have easily have pivoted in this direction. He could have even said, look, the biggest threat is, or you could have said, China is a threat economically and technologically speaking. And, circling back around, like, say, look, China has the technology and is investing in all this technology that it's essentially, going to the same technology that's going to displace millions of their own workers and our workers. This was a big chance for him to paint this picture where technology is the thing to fear, and that we need to do our part and invest in the same kinds of technologies that will benefit all Americans. And then you can pivot again back to the freedom dividend and say, look, we need to have this structure in place where we invest in technology so we'll never be outpaced by foreign adversaries or foreign powers, and at the same time making sure every single American is benefiting from those technologies. Big missed opportunity here, I think. And these are unfortunately, the two direct questions that Andrew had throughout the night, which was beyond gross. I just can't even, to be frank. So Andrew, I really think, yes, he was screwed by MSNBC by getting really just what he said, less than 3 minutes of talking time. For two direct questions, less than 3 minutes of talking time. Andrew needed to put himself out there a little bit more, but in his own way. He's not going to be Kirsten Gillibrand being like a screeching hawk. He's not going to be, Swalwell taking cheap shots at an old man. I mean, that's not Andrew. And we shouldn't expect that to be Andrew. But what he can do is provide, technical insights into a lot of these problems. And still, he needs to focus on speaking more slowly, getting more succinct answers, and having that opportunity to paint the picture that we all saw over the long form interviews, like on the Joe Rogan, David Pakman, or what other channels that you've watched him on. This is not an easy concept, and he needs some political advisors or debate coaches to really help him here in this regard. Because I love Andrew, but he's not going to get that wave until he gets his own breakout moment, and that is the reality of this the format that he's playing against. So let's hear his end speech. I think it was pretty good. Let's see here.
Brought that same portion by 60 votes.
But I voted against the bailout twice.
Thank Trump. Thank everyone who put me on this stage tonight. I am proof that our democracy still works. Democrats and Americans around the country have one question for their nominee, and that is, who can beat Donald Trump in 2020? That is the right question. And the right candidate to beat Donald Trump will be solving the problems that got Donald Trump elected, and will have a vision of a trickle-up economy that is already drawing thousands of disaffected Trump voters, conservatives, independents, and libertarians, as well as Democrats and progressives. I am that candidate. I can build a much broader coalition to beat Donald Trump. It is not left. It is not right. It is forward. And that is where I'll take the country in 2020.
Mr. Yang, thank you.
I thought that was actually quite excellent. Let's hear the reaction.
Senator Harris. Senator Harris, the floor is yours.
In there. Yeah, it was a good answer. I think he probably could have, I think, not had mentioned such the conservatives as much, like libertarians, conservatives, and all that stuff. I think he could have probably just said, I'm already peeling off supporters from both sides of the political aisle. You know, as you can see, like I have none of the stigma attached to being, you know, a super left politician. I'm talking sense to the American people. And that's the people that we need to concentrate on. I think he did. I think it was a pretty good ending speech. So I don't really have much to add to that. I think maybe delivery could be a little bit better. But you know, I'm really hoping that Andrew polishes up his answers and his rhetoric going forward, because he has to realize that, you know, this isn't debate. This is really not a debate. This is a mudslinging contest, and unless he can, you know, stand out in some way, and I'm not saying that he should be standing out in the ways that these, you know, screechers have been, but he needs to basically, you know, stand out. And right now, all he's doing is rattling off his numbers, and it's not landing. Just flat out, it's just not landing. And I think, yes, we should be vigilant about keeping MSNBC accountable for their horrendous treatment of this candidate, our candidate, really. But we need to be clear-eyed about where Andrew can improve, because let's face it, we all want him to win. And the only way he's going to win is if he, you know, builds that wave he was always talking about. And right now, I think unequivocally Harris won the debate last night, or on Thursday. And there's other compelling candidates, you know, so he's got to do it. All right, well, thank you for listening. If you guys want to hear more analysis on these things and keeping up with the campaign, just let me know.